Today, we discuss how to implement RBAC across the segments of your organization. Welcome back to Tanium Tech Talks. I'm your host, Ashley McGlone. Today, we are getting into the weeds of implementing Tanium RBAC at scale. Now, back in the two-part episode 81, Kat Ale gave us a great foundation of knowledge for RBAC, role-based access control, right? So in today's episode, we're going to build on that to discuss what it looks like in real life. Now, let's say you're a global company or a state government or an organization that has business units or agencies that need separated duties and permissions within a single Tanium console. If that's you, then this show is for you. So we see this commonly with subsidiary companies in a single Tanium instance, manufacturers or hospitals who have multiple sites, geographic compliance boundaries internationally, separation of roles between help desk and full admins, and the list goes on and on and on, right? That's why we call it role-based access control. There's all these different scenarios. So with me today is a Tanium expert who's done RBAC at scale, and this is the guy my peers routinely talk to for advice in this area. And he's also the primary author on a new resource center article to guide you through this process. So help me welcome Andrew to the show for his first time. Andrew, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Ashley, thanks for having me. Long-time viewer, first-time guest here. And a little bit about myself. Been working in tech now for a little over 10 years. I came from a backup company where I helped a lot of customers with doing, a lot of operations and cybersecurity stuff. Came to Tanium now 5.5 years ago, where I've been working with all kinds of complex, massive organizations to try to figure out how we can make sure we're serving their very complicated needs through our tools. And that's kind of, I didn't set out to become an RBAC expert here at Tanium. But working with some of the clients that I have, some of the projects that we have, you wind up doing a lot with the role-based access controls and really learning the differences in some of our nuances there.
Yeah, and I've heard from people over the years, not every product really supports RBAC, number one, and Tanium's implementation is very thorough. Now that's a blessing and a curse, right? Because, hey, I can control everything I want, but then I've got to design the control of everything I want. And like you said, in big companies, that gets kind of hairy. So where did this journey start for you down the RBAC rabbit hole?
I think it started with a particular customer years ago now came to me and said, we have a very complicated environment. This was a government entity that was supporting different offices and different departments that were located all throughout our state. And so it was really a challenge of how do we make sure that all of these groups who have been managing themselves for years and years are now brought on board and are on the same page as, the central office. How do we get everybody talking on the same page without losing control and their own ability to do their jobs? And that was really where we started with this.
So before we get into the whole article that you wrote, just really quick, high level, what are some of the things that you discovered on this journey down the rabbit hole of RBAC?
Yeah. So what I found more and more as we dove in with different customers and different partners was that RBAC is, we already touched on, it's very powerful. It offers all kinds of granular controls, but really there were a couple of themes that we found when it came to success. It's about successful planning, successfully understanding what you need. So, that is a global governance, that is a center of excellence team who kind of centralizes and manages things and has the vision for how Tanium operates across all of these different groups you're going to support. That comes to, really centralizing this. I said a couple of different things. It's supporting Tanium centrally. It's working and planning out your RBAC structures, and then it's having a process to manage and maintain those. Yeah, with those pieces is built and that framework set up, we found that those customers who started down this path really were able to have transformative success in their operations, being able to take one tool and taking that effectiveness out to all of their users in all of the different segments of their operations, while also having that centralized group able to have that visibility, that control that they need, that they brought Tanium in for in the first place.
Yeah, and because I know not everybody will finish this video all the way to the end, I want to get a couple shots in right up front here before we get into the article. So I know in my work in the field with RBAC, there are a couple things that you just have to get right from the beginning. If not, it's going to be a long, ugly cleanup process with directory sync and then deploying the client with the custom tags baked in. Could you talk about those 2 points for a minute? Just success from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. So one of the big pieces is making sure that you do have that alignment between how do you provision your users, how do they get into the Tanium console, and then how do you match those up with the devices that they're able to manage their targeting or in this case their tagging. We generally recommend to use some sort of like the LDAP sync for our on-premise customers, or skim provisioning to help bring users into those organizations and have them automatically sorted to where they need to be, so that this doesn't become a major onerous admin task. The other big piece of that is when it comes to segmenting your devices. How do you decide what is your flag between these different groups? We often recommend tags, but there could be a number of different methods that you want to use. And oftentimes it's also getting into what's that tagging pattern. Do you segment based on business purpose? Do you segment based on location? Do you segment based on a combination of these things? And do you need to have kind of a hierarchy between them? And so these are all concerns that we talk about with our customers when we start planning some of these things out. And we do call out a little bit within the guide as well.
Yeah, I've seen it where customers start down this path and they don't have a clean directory sync with users and groups coming in. They've created some manual accounts maybe when they started. I don't know that maybe that's just on-prem. I don't think you can even do that in cloud, but but you've got to have that set up, and then the custom tags. You've got thousands of machines running all over the world, and maybe there's no naming convention or ADOU structure or anything that they have in common. And it's really to claw back all those machines into the proper grouping takes a while with the custom tags. So I just want to call that out right up front. Like you said, those are really important. So I've led people on long enough now. I really want them to see this new article that you just released literally last week. This is some fantastic content because you and I were talking recently and we said, hey, we need some better public guidance on this. Why don't we write an article? So that's what we did. We got feedback from lots of folks around Tanium. And so now you get to benefit from that as viewers here. So Andrew, why don't you take us into the Tanium Resource Center and show us how to find this new article. Now, I will mention this for folks right up front. A login is required to access this article. We'll talk about why a little bit later. So once you've logged into the Tanium Resource Center, Andrew, how do we find this new article?
So there's going to be a couple of different ways to find that. And depending on when you reach this might change. So of course, we mentioned we published this last week. So it's in our most recent latest knowledge articles right down here. But if you are watching this, say 6 months from now, you're more likely going to want to type in the word segmentation here to our search bar, hit search, and then here it's going to be your first result, implementing organizational segmentation with Tanium.
Yeah, it was kind of funny when we named that organizational segmentation because we tried to make it broad to appeal to corporate entities, government entities. Not everybody is a business, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so I appreciate the breadth there.
Yes, you're putting the name that was a bit more of a challenge than, hey, an all-encompassing name. But we landed on something quite good, I think.
Yeah.
But
So walk us through. There's so again, for if you're not familiar navigating these articles in the resource center, you've got navigation on the left and the right. The left side is going to be the whole segments of the article, and the right side is going to be within the page. So just again, if you've not navigated those before, it's all there. So walk us through some of the high points here.
yeah, so really the high level stuff, what we wanted to call out, what we wanted to make available for everybody here with this guide is going to be, of course, introducing you to the concept of what is organizational segmentation. What do we mean when we talk about this within Tanium? And it's very simply put, it's approaching but not quite a multi-tenant type of approach within Tanium. Many of our customers ask, hey, how do I support multiple use cases, multiple instances within one Tanium console? And oftentimes they ask, like, are you multi-tenant? We're not, but this allows us to start approaching some of those very same requirements that, when you're looking at mergers and acquisitions or multiple different divisions of the same company, geographic compliance boundaries, we're solving a lot of the same problems that customers have been asking for when looking for those types of support uses.
Yeah, I'm glad
Here,
you raised the multi-tenancy question because I know some people are probably wondering, can I have multi-tenancy in Tanium? And it's a legal boundary. I
mhm.
know I've heard you say it that way. It's a legal boundary because there are some things we simply cannot segment between. Now, it might be buried in the client somewhere that people, end users, may not see, but technically on the back end, we're not separated entirely across these. We're just talking about what people can see, what they can do, and which endpoints they can touch, right? So,
Mhm.
um, there's still some commonalities that are going to run across all that. So it's not a full multi-tenancy, but I would think for most companies like these scenarios you've called out, we're going to cover 90-95% of what they need.
That's exactly why we wanted to make this content available, because it is really valuable for a lot of our customers. But yes, there are definitely still some very firm boundaries that we wanted to call out. So I appreciate you mentioning that. But some of the other segments that we, of course, wanted to talk about here, the way our help articles are now organized is basically in the different overall larger phases of the article. So you'll come in here and we talk about the introduction. Next, we move into actually planning your organizational structures. So talking about uh, the global governance and your centers of excellence. We start to talk about one of the building blocks that we actually use as part of segmentation, and then some tips and tricks for organizing and creating your custom tags for your environment. So we can kind of scroll through here, some great information about different centers of excellences and some of our recommendations. Like I touched on before, this really comes from our experience working with a large number of different Tanium customers and the situations that have arisen trying to handle this kind of federated management. While it's great that we can offer all of these different entities in the same console and have them working in harmony, there are plenty of times when decisions have to be made at that higher level, at that organizational level, and making decisions that'll affect 15, 20, 100, 200 different entities or lines of business operating through one Tanium console. And so when we're talking at that scale, it's really best to make sure that you're looking at some sort of center of excellence that can act as both a nexus of support, a nexus of configuration management, and a nexus of best practices and tips and tricks that can help communicate a lot of these things back out to your different environments. One of the things that we've seen the most that's been, I think, one of the things that's been most valuable for one of our customers that we work with that I find super notable is since we've implemented this program with them, they've been able to build a community around Tanium and usage across all of these different groups. So no longer is it or is it different admins in different companies all arguing over different things. They all come together to say, oh, I solved it this way with Tanium, to raise issues that they all have in common and to solve problems together. And it's been really fascinating to watch this evolve over the last few years as this customer's really grown this delivery model.
Yeah, and typically this is going to be some pretty large environments here where they've already got I would like to think some global centers of excellence or governance models in place that they could borrow from and teams kind of established already. And even for mid-sized to smaller companies, it's really good because, it can get wild west after a while if you don't have really good controls around who is deciding and implementing because it's not a trivial process. There's some complexity involved here, and so that centralized management will just help keep things clean for the long run.
Yes, indeed. Speaking of complexity, we kind of move on a little bit into things like the building blocks for organizational segmentation. And we like to think that all of these things individually are pretty clear and self-evident about what they are. You use custom tags. They're a piece of text you can put on the endpoints. Computer groups and management right groups decide who can see which devices and talk to which devices. But all of this put together can end up becoming a number of different configurations that can feel pretty complicated. And so we've actually put together, there's a great little graph here that we put together to try to help visualize this model and how we deliver this. So you'll oftentimes see here under our green view is things like the administrators who are going to have different content sets, roles, user groups, and these are going to be done usually your platform level admins, the people who handle the support issues across all of your different business units or organizations that you support. They might have access to different personas to help them view things just like your users do in their own experiences of Tanium. So when if I'm a hands-on keyboard support admin working at a global center of excellence for one of our Fortune 500 customers, I might come in and have a read-only view that I can see all the reports and see the status of my environment. But then when I want to take action, I have to pivot into what we call a persona. It's a way of segmenting permissions and letting you basically swap between different permission configurations. But by using these personas, your global center of excellence can pivot quickly to supporting different groups while also minimizing the risk of blowing something up or doing catastrophic damage to everyone. We've had a few scenarios where this has actually really, really helped save us. One of the things I think back to, we working with one of our customers who they opened this kind of model up for self-service endpoint management. They could do Windows 10 upgrades, manage their software, do all their patching through Tanium. Well, one of the admins at one of their segments over targeted the deployment for a Windows 10 in place upgrade. And while everything went really well, we upgraded Windows 10 very quickly for this customer. We were not prepared to do that. And luckily here, we only managed to take out or upgrade the 100 devices that they were scoped to be able to manage rather than the all computers that were on the list.
That's a story right there. I mean, that's why we're doing this, right? So if you're running with scissors, um, you know, it'll contain the blast radius here, and I'm thinking about this diagram, it's like trying to draw a square with 12 sides. I mean, and that obviously you can't do that. Well, trying to represent all these relationships as we went back and forth on this diagram, everybody had lots of competing feedback because you can't really illustrate it well. Now, our help docs, if you go out to the helpteam.com and you look at the RBAC docs, it's great, shows you all the possible combinations. But what we're doing here is we're specifically showing you these are the recommended combinations, the way things work well in this type of an RBAC case. So that's why we designed this out with business unit A, business unit B. Here are the components that each would need. And so this is not out of the box. This is saying these are the components. This is the way to structure those components in the most successful way and help you see a little bit of the relationship with those. And then the little asterisk here is for your default persona. So out of the box, like Andrew said, you don't want people to default to all the permissions in the world. You want them to default to their most restrictive set, so they have to flip their persona to do something intentionally that could affect a larger segment or have a greater impact.
Yeah. I like that something that you mentioned there, the three axes. You kind of said like trying to draw out a 12-sided square, and that made me think about that. And that's really, I think, a good way to phrase it. You're when you're putting together something like this, you really are more building a box than you are building a square. Um, because you have to have you're really building along what devices can I access, what can I do with those devices, and then you know you're looking at what content and configurations should I be able to make once you've got those. So do I have the visibility? Do I have the ability to make those changes? And what are all the tools that I have? And those are all, I think, very important when we talk about the different pieces of this. So you have your custom tags and your computer groups that combine to be your one access. What can I interact with? Then you have your content sets and your personas, which say what can I do, and then your roles and your user groups are who can do these things. And I think all
Yeah,
are
that's
very
so
very
important because every time I've sat down even though I've worked with RBAC for a while, it still makes my head hurt. And because it's a many to many relationship, you're like, how do I get this mashup of all these different combinations? And the way that works is users go into groups, and then computers go into computer groups, and then you take those permissions and you assigned these users, this user group with this computer group has this group of permissions, which is a persona that kind of bundles it all together. And so, yeah, it'll make your head hurt when you try to process all those axes.
mm-hmm. And that's partly what this is hopefully here to help. But this, with everything with Tanium, we want to provide this information out there for our customers, but definitely reach out to your technical counterparts here at Tanium if you do have questions or need some help getting these kinds of things implemented.
So, moving on in the document, the next
Mm-hmm.
section here is well, before we do, I guess we need to talk about custom tags. We kind of talked about that a little bit already. I think the main takeaway there is, like you said, governance. Make
Mm-hmm.
sure you've got a good naming convention that accounts for all the possibilities, and then getting those into the deployment as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of we put a fairly simple example here in the article talking about if you're a simple location, dividing it up based on locations, it's relatively easy to do. But if we start wanting to have some matrixing going on where we want to have business units, but also locations, you can quickly start to see how things might spiral and in terms of complexity. And so, yes, you definitely want to have a good plan in place before we start implementing our taggings and building up all of the groups.
Yep. And as you're doing that, pay attention to the criteria, the filter criteria in your computer groups. Equals versus contains versus starts with, that all can be very critical that you get that right
Mm-hmm.
as you're doing these tags.
Absolutely, because yes, the difference between equals this and starts with this is could be hundreds of devices in the wrong situation. So we want to be very careful with those. And then, next pieces we touched on, next big segment is now that we've planned things out. This is where we start talking about how do we actually build this? How do we actually put all of these pieces together and build an org within Tanium? So we bring out, different pieces and mention certain examples. This walks you through that process. Start with, you pick your custom tag, you get these created. Now we're going to start going through and building out our computer groups. We're going to create our roles. We're going to attach our permissions and personas, and then be able to start adding users to these groups. Then we want to talk about a little bit of some of the design considerations and some of the RBAC maintenance pieces. And then, moving into our next section, talking about, of course, the best practices. some of the call outs that we want to touch on when people are going to be building out or planning their own organizational segmentation implementation within Tanium. Things like when using out of the box roles. And when we pivoted into the Tanium console, you'll see I may have broken this one a little bit here. Be conscious of the fact that Tanium out of the box roles are not going to be necessarily scoped to your specific content sets or necessarily are going to be built with the intention of supporting this type of a use case. Tanium and many of our modules were not built with an organizational segmentation type of setup in mind. And so some of the assumptions for like our built-in roles are you want to see everything. That might not be true. And so we definitely recommend creating custom roles and being able to template those. In the appendix for this article, there are some actually great resources that we've made available on helping to script and to template these. Also, generally recommending things like standardized naming conventions, using the user groups and permissions as part of personas, and just sticking everything together. And we touched on leveraging personas a little earlier. What behind our recommendation of start off with the lowest permissions you need to do your day to day, and then escalate your permissions to what you need when you do need to take action.
Yeah, and if you just started out watching this video before you watched episode 81 with Cat Ale, there's a two-part episode on RBAC. In that, we go through and define what all these terms mean and walk through in detail in the user interface for each one of them. So if you started first with this video, once you're done with this video, go back and watch the other one so it'll make sense of what we're talking about with personas and all the different components here. We've defined them loosely here, just at a high level, but you really want to go back to episode 81 to get the details.
Yeah, we're definitely working on the assumption that you've seen what Cat has done and that you've learned everything from the wise master Cat on RBAC and how everything works. And Cat has been a huge help when it came to building all of this out. Cat was actually a resource we went to very frequently when it came to putting together organizational segmentation and what eventually has become this article. So definitely a great resource here. One thing that I always like to touch on and call out is encouraging configuration reuse. Not a thing that necessarily is built in to federating Tanium necessarily, but you'll find as you go on that if you go down this path and if you're serving many different organizations, you'll find that there's a lot of things that admins at group 1 are doing that admins at group 2 are going to do and at group 3 are going to do. And it often becomes a really big point of success for these global centers of excellence that are managing Tanium for these organizations to start providing things like standardized patch lists, maintenance windows, software deployments that can really ease the amount of admin burden while simultaneously making sure that everybody's meeting the corporate baselines, being able to, or the centralized baselines, I should say. So, you have the global CIO who says everybody should be patching, meeting these certain criteria. Well, hey, we have the standardized patch list. We have a deployment. If they want to follow our pattern, all they have to do in some of our groups is literally they have to apply a tag to their computers, and then now they're part of the baseline patching.
Yeah, I know I've mentioned this in some other shows, but I was at Converge last year doing a breakout session with a manufacturer, and they said that they simply just created some of those standardized maintenance windows for things like patching, and then they just delegate the ability to assign those tags to their local remote sites. So then those sites can decide which patch window their machines get targeted in, which really is just a beautiful model.
Yeah, we found the things I really like about it is it both ensures that you have a much more predictable pattern when it comes to how these things are going to get done. They have a lot of choice in terms of like they get to pick when it happens, but it overall it just has a lot of that consistency that oftentimes you just miss. You can know, hey, group 4 didn't apply their patch tags or anything like that. And so Like it's honestly, it's been very, very helpful for every group that I've worked with to kind of see, um, get the real understanding of their environment holistically all at once. That's
Yeah,
been huge.
and think about it practically as well. I mean, we're getting ready to talk about the automation that's required here. I mean, if you've got 30 business units, 50 different agencies, 100 different sites around the world, I mean, all of a sudden it gets mind-boggling complex. As much as you can do to simplify that, I don't think you want a maintenance window for 100 different sites around the world each. So anything you can do to simplify that is really going to help.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what we've seen in almost every organization we've worked with. Is the more configuration items we can reduce, the more we can automate, the more we can depend on the pre-builts to offer as a services for our customers in these situations. The more success we see with these customers.
And that goes right back to global governance. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So touching on and mentioning automation, this gets into some content that is in the appendix for this article. It gets a little more technical, but we're going to talk a little bit about how our customers, and we provided some examples in the appendix here, that allow you to use the Tanium REST APIs to create and then proliferate your RBAC templates. So when you are creating and planning out RBAC, especially if you're going very heavy with customized roles, it might be handy for you to be able to have an example that you have pulled aside. So when you're onboarding a new group, you can run through all of that and have a process that creates their computer group and generates their tag and creates all the persona stuff and does all of this through the APIs so that it's not a matter of, hey, I've given a person 17 clicks to go through like we have here in this page, and instead it can be just built out automatically as part of a script that's going to build you out that same model every time.
Yeah,
We
with
have a
all the benefits of automation, right? So obviously it's going to save you an immense amount of time, but it's also going to be accurate, right? Because I've worked with organizations that tried to do this manually, and then okay, now we need to add a new permission that let's say we just onboarded a new Tanium module, and now I need to go grant that module permission to 30 different groups. All of a sudden that's very manual, but with this automation it saves a lot of time, and just also it's kind of daunting to think about building this out from scratch. So if you can automate, I mean, all it takes is a loop and a CSV file
Mhm.
to go build out all those all the groups, all the personas, everything you need. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's been, you mentioned when we do things like module updates, that's been one of the biggest advantages of automating this over just simply having a person set it up. Because yes, you could, in theory, if you onboard one new group in a blue moon, not a big deal. But yeah, you go and you get a new shiny new module from Tanium that you want to open up to all of these groups. That's a lot of extra clicks and a lot of extra work to do when it's 60 groups that you're supporting in your Tanium console. That might seem like a lot, but I have customers who that's a small number for. And so that's really been the big advantages of doing all this automation. It's just the simplification of the complexity management, because it's a lot of managing complexity of these kinds of projects.
Yeah, and which leads us to our last best practice here of documentation. Wow. I mean, turnover happens.
Mm-hmm.
Voluntarily or not, turnover happens. And so we need to make sure that we've got all these processes, the design principles behind them documented, checked into that global governance board so that people have, a run book for how this works, where to find the scripts, how to update the scripts, what are the permissions required to get in there. So all that really needs to be documented, not only for like a disaster recovery process, but also just so that if somebody goes on vacation, they can't, number one, they can go on vacation because the documentation's there.
Exactly. And that's so much of this is that we want to make sure that ultimately here at Tanium, our goal is to have these things be simplified so that, yeah, people can go on vacation. We don't want you guys having to spend every weekend clicking every button, to try to make sure patches are pushed out. And that's you'll see that theme from us in so many of our things is how can we help you automate? How can we help you simplify it? But yeah, you got to make sure it's documented too along the way. Otherwise, when something goes wrong or simply somebody has a question, we want to make sure you can get those answers.
Before we get to the resources and the conclusion, I want to jump back to the limitations for a second on the constructing an organization at Tanium. In the bottom of that section, there's a section that's very short on design limitations. And to cut to the chase here, you'll notice it says the Discover module and the Asset module. All right, the way Tanium works is we get responses from the endpoint. And that is how our permissions work. That's how our sensors bring back answers, our packages take action, and it's also how our RBAC works. So Discover and Asset bring data back, but then they store it in a flat database. So as of today, as of this recording, there's very limited ability. There are some limited abilities for RBAC there with that data, but it's a different animal. And so you need to be aware of that. And that's why if we go to the conclusion here, and we scroll down just a little bit to the resources, if I were a Tanium admin, I would bookmark this page right here. All right. This is your secret to all the things RBAC, because there's the documentation, but that master RBAC link page, why don't you hit that for a second? That master RBAC link page on the third one, folks, if I know we talked about this when we did the RBAC session with Kat, but every module has different things that it gives permissions on. So how do you know what those are? Here's your master link page, the key master, so to speak, like the matrix. And it's going to show you all the kinds of permissions, what's included in them, all the different out-of-the-box roles. So yeah, these resources here are priceless. So make sure you bookmark that as you're mapping this out, and it'll help you understand, okay, what do I need to give this user exactly? It's all there.
It's funny you call that out. I actually, since we put this in the article, I've referenced this list myself just so many times when I'm like, oh, great, I have all of them in one place right now. This is beautiful.
Yep. If this is your new task in life to do Tanium RBAC implementation, this is your page right here.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I know this is an unusual tech talk because we're over a half an hour in and we've not shown the Tanium console yet. And I'm fine with that because this really is, you emphasized from the beginning how important planning is. There's a lot of conversations around this. So now, could you take us into the console and kind of walk through what some of these, we obviously can't walk through everything, but could you just walk us through some of the things in the console that we need to be aware of here as we map out RBAC across multiple organization segments?
Yeah, absolutely. We can dive in and kind of show some of the options that we have here in the Tanium console and how we configure these different pieces. So here we are in our test lab, and we have a couple hundred devices. I like to come in here because we have a great representation from different platforms, all kinds of different systems, and we have a great selection of data to show. And we've built out a couple of different personas here that we can play with. But really all of this comes into, I'll start up here with the personas that I have access to, and we'll switch to pick on my Raleigh location here. So I want to dive in. I want to see all of the machines that I have located within my Raleigh data center, which is a very large 2-device data center here. You can see that I'm able to break this down. I have a system, a number of these systems, and I can start reporting specifically on the information available within my devices here. So I know that I have 232 patches I still have to apply across these 2 different systems. Probably got to get on top of the guys managing these devices here. What's interesting, though, is I also, of course, have scoped these guys down. I do not have the ability to go in. I don't have all of the modules. I don't have all the capabilities that we have at the platform level, but I can view my compliance findings. I can take a look at my deploy software, or I can manage my patching right here through for these users through these different groups. And so that's been a big piece of the change that we've, or of the implementation model as we've been working with here, is being able to help keep this scoped. So we'll take, for example, patching. I'm in my limited scope user here. I can go into modules, patch, and I'm going to pick a patch list. We're going to go ahead and pick our Tanium baseline patch for Windows. So we'll deploy this one, select, and I'm going to click install. This now pivots into my new deployments piece, and I can go ahead and select my available computer groups that I have to manage, which aren't too many. I right now really only have the Raleigh endpoints, or I can create a question criteria, create a filter just like I would if I was doing normal Tanium targeting. Or of course, I can supply a list of computer names. So up to 100 computer names, or upload a CSV file to help target those as well.
Now,
All of
to
those.
call back to what you said earlier, Andrew, you said that there was a customer, wink, wink, who tried to deploy to all computers and they only hit 100. So this is the example of, even though you might be able to say in a filter to try to target all Windows workstations, it's not going to be all Windows workstations. It's going to be the ones that you've been assigned via RBAC.
Yes, and that's exactly it. Is so like here the question, I won't pick on them here, but they were building a question. It had all computers in part of the filtering, and it over targeted for their group. But luckily, this was their catch all, was something scoped there and kept everything from going too far out. And then just like a normal deployment, I can go through, I can set all my deployment times, I can set my deployment templates, I can decide if I'm going to be notifying people, and then I'm going to just hit preview to continue. And then from there, this is just a new patch that I would be deploying out, or a new set of patch lists that I would create targeting my specific set of devices.
Very nice. And so, as you can see, folks, as you're watching this, this is a very scoped experience for those site administrators, different roles, different permissions, all scoped out here so they can only do what's needed on the machines that are needed.
Absolutely. And that's been a big piece of this. So now I'm going to pivot back to the home screen, and I'm going to switch back to my main role, because I want to show some of the building blocks of how we put these pieces together. And so we'll pivot in here to administration. And first we'll talk personas. I always like to go in here, and I'll grab my 2 example users. Just a moment. And we have our 2 different example personas. I'm going to open up our Raleigh example just to kind of show you the pieces. If you're unfamiliar with this view, I definitely recommend the videos with the cat videos here, where I know we dive in a lot more on the user group and persona permissions views to get familiar with. But what we'll show you, I'll just show you guys here. You give our persona a name that I can pivot into. Here are the different roles that assign the permissions, things my persona is able to do. And for the purposes of this example, we put together a number of default user type of permissions that they're all scoped, but they don't have as much access as maybe we would have wanted. So like this user, we dive into the actual permissions. It's limited on certain capabilities, certain features that we might actually want to offer a real regional operator. There's more details in the appendix, but this was an example here for this for today. And you can see it brings in a number of different permissions. We get things scoped as we go down here to content sets. These are where we're actually able to interact with, or the different configuration items we can see. And so a lot of this is giving access to default stuff for these users so that I can create things in the default and the baselines as a governance, but then still give my end users the ability to consume this content. So if I build out a patch list, or I build out maybe a Tanium package that is valuable for helping out my different admins in my different organizations, they'll still have access to that. And so this allows us to federate and kind of split all of that up. You can see the computer groups that get assigned here. So in this case, I've restricted management to the Raleigh all endpoints devices. And then you can see which users I've added here. So I just have myself added as the one user for this persona today.
And again, thinking back to that diagram in the article, we don't have to flip there now, but remember that diagram kind of put all these pieces in one place. So now you see this is what it looks like and translates to in the console. And then behind the scenes, you can have the scripts to build this all out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that with all of these pieces, with the scripts, with personas, you end up with a very powerful Tanium console that allows almost a different entire experience from what we've shown oftentimes on this show.
Yeah, because this is really, I mean, Tanium started with some of the largest customers in the world and some of the most complex environments. So we've really grown with them and helped them to have that level of capability they needed. So we've looked at the article, we've looked at all the guidance and best practices there. Write it all down, document it, get some central governance, all those good tips. We've looked at it in the console. So, Andrew, I'm curious to hear from you as you've done a lot of this work in the field. What are the RBAC questions that you get the most?
I think most of them come down to the most common question I get is how should I scope my access to my users? And that really gets into our conversation around planning and tagging. While this is pretty simple, this content here, I think, actually has a lot of there's so much nuance, and we oftentimes spend a lot of time when building this out on how should we tag this, how should we build this structure, and like this part here seems fairly straightforward, but this is very much a lot of time in these implementations will get spent here. I think another big question we get a lot, and this one's a little more around, discover or asset, and that's, how can I scope those to be able to support my users? And the answer is, they do support within those modules, they do support different permissions scoping, but things like the asset module has a different way of handling things. Like you mentioned, it's a flat file type of structure. And so you have to provide a different way of categorizing who should get access to that. If you pivot into asset, there is the ability to configure some permissions up in here where you can basically say a user group can match a particular attribute, but it is not the same as the rest of the RBAC on the platform. And so that's, I think, another the questions I get a lot of the time is, hey, how come asset isn't working the same way as the rest of these things?
Yeah, those are great popular questions, and Discover's similar in that it can group by sites, which are defined by groups of subnets, which is not perfect either, but it gives you some degree of control over that data as well. So, Andrew, thank you for number one, all the work that you've done in the field to help our customers, and then distilling that into this document for our customers and partners and prospects to use, because this really is essential Tanium knowledge. So folks, I want to remind you, if you just go to help.tanium.com, there in the big search box, and you type in segmentation, it'll take you straight to this new article we've released. So if that's you, if you need organizational segmentation like we demonstrated today, this article will walk you through everything you need there. And don't forget that conclusions page that has all those money links right there, the gold, right? All those golden links to get you to the RBAC cheat sheets, and to episode 81, which I know if you've not watched it, you're going to go watch it right after this one, right? So, but together, we're putting these resources out to give you what you need to be confident as you move forward. And as always, after you've gone through the documentation, after you've implemented some of this on your own, feel free to reach out to our support center to guide you as well. So thanks again to Andrew for our expert today. Thank you for hanging with us. I know this episode is a little bit longer, but as you can see, I think we've given you the tools now So you're no longer struggling against this 12-sided square, right? Now you know what are the axes, what I need to control, how do I do that. So, as always, feel free to reach out if you've got any questions or comments as well. You can ping us on social media or just simply email go@tanium.com, and we'd love to help you as well. So, with that, that wraps up this episode of RBAC for Organizational Segmentation at Scale. And until next time, Go-Tanium.